My name is Matthew Todd, and welcome to Inside the Scale Up. This is the podcast for founders and executives in tech looking to make an impact and learn from their peers within the tech business. We lift the lid on tech businesses, interviewing leaders and following their journey from startup to scale up and beyond, covering everything from developing product market fit, funding and fundraising models to value proposition structure and growth marketing. We learn from their journey so that you can understand how they really work, the failures, the successes, the lessons along the way, so that you can take their learnings and apply them within your own startup or scale up and join the ever-growing list of high-growth UK SaaS businesses. Hey, welcome back to the podcast. Pleased today to welcome Euan Cameron from Willo on the podcast. Great to have you here.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, looking forward to this conversation. And as always, I'd like guests to introduce themselves. Tell us a little bit about what it is that they do. What does Willo do? And a little bit about your background as well.
Sure. So my background is actually digital marketing. I started my career over 15 years ago in digital marketing when it was quite a new concept. Most marketing departments were still traditional marketing departments with lots of paper-based media, radio, TV, all that kind of stuff. So it was an interesting time for me to start my career, just when these marketing departments were transitioning into a more digital focus. And over the course of the kind of career that I've had so far, I've had the pleasure of working in a number of different sort of scale-ups, I suppose you would call them, startups and scale-ups in their digital marketing efforts, either as the sole marketing person or part of a bigger team and building a bigger team around me.
Yeah.
And over the course of my career as well, successfully started 4 startups, Willo being my 4th. And today, Willo is my sole focus. So 100% of my effort and time goes into Willo. And it's really just all about, taking investment from VCs and turning that into a scalable, viable business, which is actually quite new to me. My previous businesses were never VC backed. They were always funded or bootstrapped. So it's quite an interesting journey in itself. And a little bit about Willo. I suppose Willo is a video interviewing platform. So asynchronous video interviewing allows you to interview candidates on video, text, or audio in an asynchronous manner, a recorded manner, and it's all one way. And benefits for that process is that the candidates can do it whenever they want, wherever they want in their own time, which is hugely advantageous, particularly when people are busy, already working in employment. When you introduce time zones, all that kind of stuff, it gets really complicated to interview people live. So doing one-way or asynchronous videos is quite powerful for a lot of our customers.
No, absolutely. And it makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I have to say from the website, it certainly looks really, really nice as well. But on the subject of your kind of background in startups, then in founding Willo, you kind of went straight in for saying it's about, the VC route, making a return on that investment. Was that the primary objective? what led you to deciding on Willo as the right vehicle for the next business?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the real, I guess, the why behind Willo is that we want to connect people everywhere with opportunities. And to make that a lot more digestible, what we want to do is help candidates that are traditionally marginalized by the hiring process. And we want to help them into the hiring process and help them stand out alongside others in the hiring process. So if we, for example, take me as a dyslexic person, dyslexic people struggle with writing CVs and therefore struggle to actually submit good CVs to employers and end up getting less opportunities because they don't get through the first stage of screening. And there's a whole bunch of examples like that. Other examples that I really see us pushing and succeeding in over the past few years are in geographic limitations. So we have, for example, people that live in the countryside, the employers in the city. The traditional employer will ask the person to come into their office, but for a lot of people that live in the countryside, that's not doable. It's not possible. They might have, for example, issues paying for transport. They might not have access to transport at all, but they could be the best candidate that employer's ever seen, but they just don't get the opportunity because they can't travel in. And we also have things like, for example, shift workers, and they're traditionally marginalized because shift workers can't actually come to interviews. For example, if they're working a shift in the morning and a shift in the afternoon, if they don't attend those shifts, they don't get paid.
Yeah.
But the employer says, hey, I want you to come in at 3:00 in the afternoon. They have to make a decision, which is a very hard decision. Do I go to that shift and get paid? Or do I take a shot and actually go to this interview, potentially lose my shift for future, but also lose out on the money? And it's a really difficult decision, which a lot of people don't want to have to take. And that's, again, a really good example just where traditional hiring practices can really exclude a lot of people from the hiring process. So we have lots of different ways of kind of combating that with Willo. But the why is really helping these people all over the world get access to opportunities and get access to the hiring process in a more accessible, enjoyable, and candidate-friendly way. And that's what we're doing. That's kind of the why, I suppose, behind everything we do. It started with me being a dyslexic person, and then it started kind of snowballing when I did a lot of hiring myself. So I was hiring into these previous businesses.
Yeah.
And I started to realize quite quickly that, hang on, this doesn't make any sense. I'm inviting these people into an office, but they might not have a car. They live too far away. Maybe they've just left school and they have no access to transport, or it's too difficult for them to get here, all that kind of stuff. Or maybe they're really good and they're already in a job. They don't want to leave that job for a day. There's a whole bunch of reasons. And that was what led me into start, researching and developing and building out a solution that enable people to get into hiring and into the hiring process.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I think it sounds so obvious when you point out all the different ways that those hiring problems will preclude, many people from being able to attend, whether it's geography, transport, or, as you say, the CV writing capability, geography, whatever that may be. It sounds obvious that, the world and technology can provide a much more modern solution to something that hasn't really changed, it seems, in quite a long time.
Absolutely. Yeah, it almost blows my mind when you dive into specific examples like that. It blows your mind that employers still in 2023 don't have, alternative methods of hiring. They're still resorting to the traditional job advert, send in your CV, come and meet us, and then we'll offer you. It's quite insane when you look at it.
Yeah, it is. And I've been on both sides of that kind of conversation before, from hiring and being hired in the past as well. And I think when myself or other colleagues were put into that hiring position, no one knew what they were doing. Everyone was just reproducing something that happened to them when they were hired. So I think it's, we'll read a CV. We got some to screen. I don't really know what I'm looking for. I don't like the look of these. I like the look of those. Let's try and book some time slots in. Oh, they can't attend. Therefore, we've got 3 people. Who should we pick?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, just let me add in something there because it's quite interesting. So there's a really good point you just touched on there, which is nobody ever gets trained on how to hire. And that is obviously another real challenge that hiring has. We're typically asking managers, again, a lot of managers haven't been trained how to be managers, but that's for another day. But we're asking managers to also start hiring and hire good people for their team. But yeah, most managers are never told or trained on how to do a good job of hiring, which again is a whole other challenge with hiring and employment in general, and even the transition between different roles within organizations isn't very well trained and planned out. People end up in different roles and they move around and they bounce around different departments because no one really knows what they're looking for. Yeah. One of the interesting things that we're working on, and we have been for the past couple of years now, is how do we make the hiring process consistent for candidates, but also consistent for hiring managers. So we have a bunch of questions. We have a question bank that gets suggested. And say you're hiring for a salesperson. The salesperson can be asked 5 questions, but every single person that goes through your interview gets asked the same 5 questions. And then the hiring manager, when they review them all, gets to watch all of those candidates answering the same 5. Yeah. And what that does is that gives you something to benchmark and have a level playing field on. For example, if you watch everyone's question 1 back, which is what we suggest you do, you can watch them together. You get to the end of every question 1, and you have a benchmark as to what everyone else was question 1 was like.
I see.
Rather than, for example, what you were saying a minute ago, people come in, they get asked a bunch of questions, and then the next person comes in, the conversation's normally completely different. They start chatting about something different. How was your day? How did you get here? It's all just like a complete rehash of the previous interview.
Yeah.
And you end up asking that you can compare. There's no apples for apples. It's all just a random fruit bowl that you're supposed to try and compare. So that's quite an interesting area that we're working on, but it's still in its infancy. There's quite a lot of work to do to kind of train and make the process consistent for both sides.
Yeah, I guess asking the right questions and good questions has got to play a big part into that as well, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, asking the right questions, good questions, and also the timing of those questions. So when you ask them, it's quite interesting. So for example, if you imagine you're a traditional hiring manager, you're not using Willo. You interview someone at 9 a.m. You then interview someone at 5 p.m. The way that you ask those questions and the way that those questions are answered is very different.
Yeah.
If you, for example, you're feeling fresh, it's 9 a.m., you're ready to go, you're going to ask the question in a slightly different way, most likely, and the person's going to respond in a slightly different way. Whereas the 5 p.m. one, you're probably tired, you've probably heard the answer like 6 or 7 times, you're probably a little bit bored of your question,
yeah.
So you're going to change the wording maybe, and you're going to get a completely different answer from the candidate. You can't compare the 5 p.m. to the 9 a.m. candidate anymore. They're completely different conversations.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, I can see how it does give a lot more consistency and quality in that whole hiring process and experience for all parties with something, that works the way as you describe. How tricky has it been for you to how tricky has it been for people to change the way that they hire? Is it a pretty easy thing once they see the potential, or have there been challenges in terms of convincing people that what they're doing could be improved?
Yeah, so this is an interesting point, I think, for businesses in general, which we'll go into in a bit of detail here then. So the biggest challenge that we have as a business, or one of the biggest challenges we have as a business, is the education of customers. So first of all, educating them on what Willo is, but then educating them how they use it and get value from it.
Right.
Those things are a challenge for most businesses, unless you're in a space where you're competing with some commoditized product. People don't really know what you're offering or how to get the most value out of it. So Willo falls into that category all day long. We can attract customers, we get them to us, they can submit a demos request so they can sign up and use the platform. But getting them to actually extract the maximum value from the tool is a really difficult educational journey that we have to take them on.
Yeah.
So we, for example, once we have them as customers or we have them on trials, we have a customer success manager now, and Faith is her name, and she's responsible for taking people through the onboarding process, but then taking them through internally, how do we change our processes to get maximum value from the tool? There's no point, if one person, for example, in the organization's, sold on the idea of Willo and likes it, they use it, they're not getting maximum value because the whole organization can benefit from the tool. If you, for example, are an organization with 1,000, 2,000 employees, you're making a lot of hires. You're typically going to have some churn, and you're going to have some new hires for growth. There's constant hires going on. If you can get everyone in the organization using Willo, you're going to get maximum value because everyone's going to be hiring consistently. All the hiring managers are going to be able to collaborate. You can bring your teams in. So we have a real journey that we take people on, and we have to try and get them to change their internal ways. Now, I guess I would caveat that with it's just not always possible. So, for a certain example, customers just cannot change their internal processes. Yeah. And I would say that's unfortunately more true of the HR and talent acquisition departments than other departments. HR talent acquisition departments tend to have quite limited budgets. They also tend to have quite limited sort of word or say as to how the organization works, whereas other departments have slightly more autonomy. If you look at, for example, the marketing department in an organization, they can they have bigger budgets, they can spend on different things, they can try different things, they can fail at certain things, and no one really cares as long as they can keep delivering more and more leads and eventually succeeding.
Yeah.
The HR talent acquisition departments, they tend to be under more scrutiny, they have smaller budgets, and like I said, they've got less say, so it is harder for them to roll out these changes. And we're, I guess, at the mercy of that to a certain extent. And that's, again, where Faith is doing a great job. She's obviously trying to identify the ones where they are more challenging and then trying to help those champions that we have, typically our customers, sell Willo as a concept and as a solution into the wider team. And that's like I said, a big challenge and a big educational journey. But we're far from being alone on that. A lot of specifically software today has that challenge where the software can be amazing. It can change an organization, but if you don't have complete buy-in from the organization, it will flop and it'll be really difficult to really demonstrate value.
And in terms of demonstrating value then, what are some of the ways that you found that are effective in showing them that there is a return on that investment in something new like Willo?
Yeah, so interesting question, and I would say quite a simple answer for most software, particularly B2B software, is time. So either time saved or money cost saved. So time and money, it's obviously pretty typical business metrics. If you can save somebody time, great. If you can save the money, even better. We try and play on both of those. So we're going to show you how much time you save by using Willo, but we're also going to show you how much money you save by using Willo. Those are the two key levers that we have.
I see.
And if you start using Willo, we have a whole bunch of dashboards and things that we can pull data from that will say, hey, you did 35 interviews last month, you saved 100 hours, and that equates to $6,000 of salaries within your organization.
Yeah.
So that's like the hard metrics. There is softer metrics as well. So for example, things like more diverse team, more engaged team, better hires overall. Again, harder to always pin down exactly what that looks like and means for organizations, but quite powerful if you can, for example, demonstrate less churn. We have some great clients that do actually track that, so they can look back and say, we hired those 10 employees last month through Willo. They're all still here. 2 of them have been promoted. 2 of them have moved into other departments and they're like excelling. So they can demonstrate that. But like I said, but most of it is going to be those 2 hard metrics to begin with that really demonstrate the value. And that really works up and downstream. So for example, if we give you that report, you can take that to your director and your director is going to be happy.
Yeah.
They're going to understand that you save money and time, and great. And then you can also pass that down to your colleagues and explain to them that by using the tool more, you'll save more time and obviously save the organization more money. So it's quite easy to communicate throughout the organization, those 2 metrics.
I see. And I can imagine that obviously helps with your own kind of churn metrics as well. But is that something you're able to then use to expand and promote usage then within existing organizations?
Yeah. So we do quite a lot of case studies. I guess the interesting thing about the case studies is that they tend to be quite industry specific.
Okay.
So we're working on a big bank of case studies at the moment. And the purpose of the bank of case studies is that we want to align those with the industries of the customers that we're speaking to, because they're all so different. Everyone has different hiring needs, challenges, and requirements, and it has to be quite tailored. So that's been a piece of work that we'll be working on for the foreseeable future. And case studies are quite difficult to do as well, just because you need sign off, you need time from the client, all that kind of stuff. So trying to get diaries and stuff to line up is quite a challenge, but they're great if you can demonstrate those metrics.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And obviously you're in a great position where you can do that now, but kind of going back to the early days of Willo, what did it look like to, even try and build and then acquire those early customers onto the platform? How was that early part of the Willo journey?
So we bootstrapped Willo to existence. So we spent 2019 scoping, researching, and building. And we did it in that order. So we scoped out what we were doing. We researched, then we went back, scoped a bit more, scratched a whole bunch of stuff off the drawing board, scoped again, spoke to more customers, spoke to a lot of candidates as well.
Okay.
So this is something that not many people realize, is that we actually interviewed more candidates than customers. And we asked candidates some quite simple questions like, if you could redesign the hiring process, what would it look like? If you could redesign the interview process, what would it look like? Yeah. What do you hate about interviews? What do you love about interviews today? All that kind of stuff. We just spoke to, over 100 candidates in the space of 6 months and got a ton of learnings from them. And that was, I guess, part of the success, I think, of today, is that a lot of our particular kind of real core product is based on the feedback from the candidates who are our ultimate user. If you look at the user base, we have about 10,000 paying users right now.
Yeah.
But we'll interview 1 million candidates this year. We clearly have a lot more candidates using the platform than customers.
Yeah.
So candidates are really important, but it's not something that people often see as being a success or a real like key part of what we did. But yeah, interviewing a lot of people, speaking to a lot of people, rescoping and shaping, and then we spent the final 6 months of 2019 building the platform. Found a small group of amazing engineers in Ukraine and built the platform with them to like MVP level, and then launched it in January 2020. So we went out 1st of January 2020 with an MVP, and we had a wait list. So I guess this is worth sharing because it's a useful insight. We had a wait list that we built in 2019 of about 150 customers. And the wait list was really, hey, we're building this amazing video interviewing tool, sign up and get early access. And it was like a small landing page, quite simple. We put some Google ads behind it. We did some press as well.
Okay.
So we did some quite early PR, which was directed towards the landing page, getting the name out there, building a bit of interest and intrigue more than anything else. And then launched January, and we went out to that database of people, all 150 of them. I was typically speaking to most of them on the phone, but also emailing them and just saying, hey, this is now here. I'd love for you to try it. There was no kind of incentive for them to try it. There was nothing really there other than, hey, this might be interesting. Do you want to give it a go?
Okay.
And we got our first customer the following month. So something obviously worked there. We had our first paying customer in February. And it was actually just a week ago today. So a week ago of this recording, which was really cool, back in 2020. And it was exciting for us for a couple of reasons, but most excitingly was the fact that somebody was willing to pay at that point for what was a really basic tool. It was really, we constantly found issues. There was crashes, there was bugs. It was a real mess, but it was really cool to see somebody actually wanted to pay for it, because that was our validation point that this could actually be something quite serious. Because up until this point, we hadn't really put any real, resource into it. We put in a few £1,000 each, and we put in a bunch of our time, but that was about it. And then when somebody started paying, it was like, holy shit, we need to actually do something about this now. This is real.
Yeah.
And we then started acquiring more customers in March, April, May. COVID came along, obviously, around that time. And it could have gone either way, but thankfully it went the right way. Remote work became bigger, which is what we were counting on anyway, but it became bigger much more quickly. And remote work really pushed the success in the early days for us, where we could focus on things like, helping businesses pivot, helping businesses survive this, helping businesses grow their teams. So we had lots of customers back in 2020, 21 that were doing really well during COVID. If you remember, there was, for example, a lot of e-commerce businesses, warehouse businesses, food delivery companies, all that kind of stuff did really well. A lot of them became our customers.
I see.
Because they needed to grow quite rapidly, but they couldn't meet people in the office face-to-face and interview them. So they jumped onto Willo quite quickly. So that was quite a cool early sort of bit of fuel for us, I suppose, that helped push things along.
Yeah.
And I suppose that was the early days. I guess other interesting insights from the early days, other than speaking to a shit ton of candidates in Starbucks, was following every user journey. So actually asking users if we could record their sessions, and just recording their sessions on the platform through Hotjar.
Okay.
And then watching all those Hotjar videos back. And I literally would do that for hours a day, just sit on my computer, watching users, watching candidates use the platform and interacting, and then seeing where they dropped off.
Okay.
And then hypothesizing about why they dropped off, and then trying to fix that. And it just became a real game at that point to try and improve and iterate and get more value and get people staying on the platform. So it was pretty clumsy in the early days of the platform, but it quickly became something that people could actually use once we knew what they were looking for. I didn't want to build in anything that was too complex, or build in any advanced features, because we didn't know what people really wanted to use.
Yeah.
Although they said what they might want to use in all the research interviews, you don't really know until you see them using it whether they're going to actually use it.
They can often be very different things and what they say they would use and would value can often be, oh, that sounds nice. Versus
Yeah,
actually, no, if it was there, I would really engage with that and find that actually useful.
absolutely. Yeah. So we managed to avoid a lot of those pitfalls by just watching and speaking to customers as they use it rather than anything else. And that's where I guess here's a successful tip is that we did a free trial, which we still do today. And the free trial back then was like unlimited free trial. It's now 15 days.
Yeah.
But in that free trial period, you have an amazing opportunity to observe users and see what they're looking for without having to do a huge amount of research or work. They're just going to bring you the answers that you need a lot of the time.
I think that's a really good and interesting way to look at that, is by using technology like that to actually see how people are using it rather than relying on, a subset of those being surveyed after the point in time. It's real information. It's real time, isn't it?
Yeah. It's also interesting because a lot of people say, oh, can we just like send them a survey and things? And I find surveys are just about as shit as speaking to them, because what they think they need and what they actually need are very different. And if you see a box pop up in front of you and there's 4 different answers, you have to pick one of those answers. You're going to pick the answer that you think is right. And it ends up, a lot of companies will steer and dictate their roadmap based on those surveys. Whereas what we do is actually observe. And I think there's way more power in observing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's interesting you mentioned that trial period that you have. Kind of, what are you trying to guide someone towards in that trial period? Like, what outcome are you hoping to drive them towards? Enough that they will then become a paying customer.
Yeah, that's a good question. So that's the simple answer is 7 interviews. They need to interview 7 candidates in that period. If they interview 7 candidates in that period, they're most likely going to convert to a paying customer. Any less than 7, and they probably could have done the interviews in the traditional way.
Okay.
They could have done it over Zoom or Skype or whatever. Whereas if they do 7 or more, they're saving a huge amount of time, but they're also doing it enough times that they can see the true value. So that's our kind of key metric. We want them in that period to use the tool more than 7 times. Now, whether that's as an individual or whether that's as a team of 3 or 4, it doesn't really matter. But once they hit that magic number, they're far more likely to convert and actually become a paying customer. So that's the purpose. When we talk about conversion and acquisition, is to get them to 7. But there is other hidden purposes. For example, I just mentioned research and development. We use the free trial people to figure out, what are we doing right and what we're doing wrong, and what can we do better. And they're an amazing source of information that you just don't get in lots of organizations. For example, if we had a paywall right at the start and people can use the tool without paying, they're a very different person because they've already convinced themselves that they want to use this tool. So they pay you and then they come through. But you end up really open to selective bias because there's a whole bunch of people that you never get to see. We're quite fortunate we get to see everyone. And obviously not everyone converts, but the ones that didn't convert, we can hopefully do something about and stop that happening again in the future.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting to look at, ways you can use that data as well as the outcome of whether they did or didn't become a customer at that point in time as well.
We're still paying them, we're still paying to acquire them as well. So it's not like a free source of information. We still pay hundreds of pounds to acquire them, but they do have a huge amount of value, even if they don't pay.
Yeah, I guess it's making sure that the economics work so that you can both gather that data, but also become profitable, so you get a decent payback period on the cost of acquisition as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And on the subject of that economics and pricing, I know many SaaS startup scale-up founders struggle, especially with B2B pricing, when they're still figuring out the positioning and things like that as well. And I've seen people fall into the trap of underpricing and then lowering pricing if they don't get the results, when it's actually just the value proposition that's just not right. How, in your experience of a few different startups, have you kind of approached pricing for a product like Willo?
So there's different types of products. Previous businesses that I've worked in have been quite commoditized, so you're typically looking for a price that's competitive. I guess in our space it's been slightly different this time around, where we have fallen into the trap of underpricing. And underpricing, firstly attracts a lower type of a lower value type of customer, so like an SME or an SMB.
Yeah.
We don't really want SMEs or SMBs because they don't get the value out of the tool. They're not going to do 7 interviews a month, for example. They're going to do a handful. They're not going to do very many, and they're quite spiky when it comes to hiring. So we don't want those guys, but we ended up pricing ourselves at the start.
I see.
To attract them, which was a real mistake. And then the other mistake with underpricing is that the perceived value of the tool is less. And that's just a mindset thing, which we really need to work on. I think that's something that we still need to do better. For example, we know another business in the space, they increased their pricing quite significantly, like 25%.
Okay.
On all pricing plans, but they actually sold more and did more revenue by doing that, and it was purely because the buyers had a higher perceived value, a higher perception of the outcome, because they were spending more on this tool. And that's quite true for most B2B SaaS, I think, across the board. If you price yourself too low or too cheaply, people don't think they're going to get much out of it. They also don't hold it highly in regard. For example, here's a perfect example. We pay HubSpot a lot of money, like far too much money every month.
Yeah.
But because we pay so much money, I'm always trying to make sure that we maximize the use of the tool. Yeah. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, there's tools that we pay like £20 a month for, and we don't really care if we use them or not. Some people use it, some people don't.
Yeah.
And it's just something that's there. And, we could cancel it tomorrow and I don't really give a shit, or the card might expire and it just stops working and no one really notices.
Yeah.
So there's definitely something to be said for having that higher price point. People use it more. User adoption tends to be higher as well. And ultimate values is then eventually higher as well. So that's something that we need to totally work on though. So I'm not going to kind of sugarcoat anything here. I would say that we still have a lot of work to do in pricing. It's quite a difficult thing to do. You can't just like take a whiteboard and write down all your competitors' prices, because everyone's got different value propositions. They've got different verticals that they're looking to target.
Yeah.
They also have different unit economics behind the scenes. For example, a recently VC funded business will have very different unit economics from a bootstrapped or profitable business. So there's a whole bunch of stuff behind the scenes which needs to be factored in, which is why I think it does make it quite hard to just, it's not like this commoditized product where you can just look at everyone else and go, oh, we need to be about here.
Yeah.
We've all got the same costs. Everyone has different goals, different costs, different outcomes, different customers. And yeah, it's much more difficult. So we're doing it mostly quarterly, but I would say in the past year, we've done it more half a year. We've done price changes and they've been for the better. So sometimes some of the plans will go up, some of them will go down. Yeah. But the plans are different for different customers, so it kind of makes sense. And then we also have the challenge of inflation, which we need to factor in. And we also have the challenge of currencies. So we trade in 5 of the key currencies.
Okay.
Including rupees, Indian rupees. But each of those currencies has its own inflation challenges. So that's another thing that adds complexity to our pricing, which other people maybe don't have. So there's a lot of work to be done there. But it's far from. I wouldn't look at ours as a good example, for example, of how to price a B2B SaaS yet. There's still a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, but I think it's really, really good that you share those kind of lessons learned, because I think a lot of SaaS founders can fall into the underpricing trap and think, well, if I just get a big client, then the numbers will stack up because there's more people using the products and per seat licensing, therefore we'll get more revenue. So let's price it lower because of them, when in actual fact, no, you don't, because they're not going to buy a cheap commodity product like you say. That value is reflected in the price they're paying for it as well. Sure. So don't be afraid of pushing that price up a bit. Yeah.
It's quite a scary thing to do though, isn't it? Like it is difficult, and it's even difficult from a sales perspective. So the sales team, they would rather ask for a $500 deal than a $1,000 deal all day long.
Yeah.
It's just easier. In your head anyway, it's easier. Doesn't mean it's actually easier in real. Like it's still probably the same amount of work. You could ask for $1 million contract or a $500,000 contract. The work is probably the same, but the outcome is twice as much, and it's just or 50% more. It's just about being brave and being quite bold and standing by those pricing decisions sometimes.
Yeah, I guess it's as much the mindset of the person doing the selling as
Yeah.
anything else. And once you do start to get a few of those, under the belt, so to speak, it then becomes normalized, doesn't it? So asking for the
Yeah.
sale that at that level then becomes just standard and much, much easier.
Yeah. And we've been exactly through that process completely. Like last January, a big price increase, normalized in the sales team by the end of Q1. They won a few deals.
Yeah.
And they thought, hey, we can actually do this. We can sell at this price. But trying to get to that point is hard.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely requires
and
focus.
I guess the challenge a lot of SaaS B2B founders have is that if you don't get there, we got there in 3 months. But imagine if 6 months later you still haven't done enough deals at that new price point to give yourself the confidence and the conviction to keep going after it. You end up going for a discount or a price reduction, and then all that work that we just spoke about is undone. And it can be a horrible race to the bottom, which is something that I want to avoid.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I've seen products go down that kind of spiral, and it does weaken the value proposition as well, because you end up making the products more generic, less appealing, more things to more people in an effort to get more people on it. And the value proposition isn't as compelling for the audience that you could have been speaking to instead, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it is tricky to have that confidence. But changing track slightly, I know you mentioned, bootstrapping and VC investment earlier. What's your opinion on the VC route then? Why go down that path for Willo?
So this is an interesting question because it was never the plan. And we launched Willo with this idea that we would just see what happens and let's just try it and see. It'd be fun if it works. It'd be fun if we get some paying customers.
Yeah.
And we'll just see. And, we could maybe borrow some money from the bank or whatever, and we could spend a bit more on it. And then the summer of that year came along and we were approached by a couple of investors and we thought, hey, this is interesting. We'd never thought about this. And we ended up doing a deal, which was amazing, with a company called 1818. So 1818 Venture Capital based in Guernsey.
Yeah.
And they were the lead investor on that round. And we also then, off the back of that, brought in a number of other angel investors, which was amazing. But yeah, I guess it was never on our minds. I'd never been in a VC-backed business before.
Yeah.
So I didn't really know what to expect. I mean, I wasn't naive enough to not know anything about it. I'd kind of done my homework on it and things, but I didn't really know what it entailed until it was actually, the money was in the bank, and then things started to become quite real. We had a big bank balance. We had expectations. We had people that we wanted to deliver returns for all of a sudden. And I guess that's my key takeaway for anyone listening that's interested in VC is that you're going to end up with lots and lots of people that are going to hold you accountable. You're going to end up with lots of people that you report to, and you're going to have a much bigger weight on your shoulders than if you just done it with a bank balance or bootstrapped it or a credit card or whatever. And that is something that is not often very transparent or clear to founders, I don't think.
The level of expectation, the pressure that comes with that?
Yeah, expectations, pressure, outcomes are very different. It's not just free money to kind of grow your business and have a bit of fun with and have a punt with. It makes it a lot more real very quickly.
Yeah.
That for example, you're not just, that's why I mentioned at the very start here, you're not just growing a business and, trying to get more customers and deliver amazing outcomes and values for your customers. You also have this other customer, which is the investor.
Yeah. And
you have to deliver for them the returns and the enthusiasm and the drive as well for them to invest in future rounds, because, the follow-on money is just as hard as the first investment round, I would say, if not more difficult, because you're almost on the stage or under the microscope the whole time. So for example, you take your first round, if you know that you need more money in a year's time, every day between that round and this round, you're going to have to be, delivering results, doing amazing investor relations, keeping them on board and excited and interested. Otherwise, that next round just doesn't happen, and then you run out of money, and that's the end of it. So there's a huge other piece, which is often, I feel, not very clear, or if it is, it's a bit maybe glamorized as well. I would say, like, oh, it's really cool, like all these investors and things, but it's quite a serious part to the job.
Yeah, I guess it's nice to get the cash and what that can enable, as well as the validation that, oh yeah, I've got a real business with a lot of potential here. But you're right, as soon as you take that first money, you start being measured from that very point onwards to deliver to an end goal, don't you?
Yeah, and you're never going to escape that either, because unless you paid all the investors back, that's it. Like, the business is delivering returns. It's kind of, from an investor perspective, it's ultimate outcome.
Yeah.
Happy customers and everything is great, but they're really looking for an outcome from that. Otherwise, there's no point. So it's quite an interesting dynamic, and it's a big dynamic shift as well, which does feed through the whole organization. For example, in this round, which we just closed, part of my agenda for the week has been to update the team on how the round is going, which is not something that most employees would ever be exposed to or see. But I feel it quite important to bring everyone on the journey, because it is quite a make or break thing. For example, if we didn't raise the money for whatever reason, then we would have to be doing significant things like cost cutting and reductions in headcount and things. It would be a totally different game. So they should be involved, I think, all the way through the investment process, because it becomes really integral to the business.
Yeah, absolutely. It really, really does. And I think it's not always made as transparent as you described it there. And I think that's when people don't understand why decisions are being made or certain directions are being followed.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, I guess it's just, you can look at it in a really negative light or a positive light. I think it's a positive thing to be that transparent and that open about the cash flow and money, because at the end of the day, we all want to walk home with paychecks, and we all want to have jobs that we enjoy doing. And that's only possible in our business at the moment anyway, with VC money and customers, and we need both. We're not at the point yet where we're profitable. So yeah, it's definitely key to what we're doing. If we're sharing customer numbers, we should also be sharing cash and VC investment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a refreshingly honest approach to take. And with that investment as well, how has that affected your ambition, or has it affected your ambition for growth? Obviously, they'll have ambitions and expectations about the return on their investment, but has it changed the size you think Willo could be, or changed the shape of it in any way?
Absolutely. And it's an interesting one. I'm smiling because yes, it does. And I think it was much more clear in the early days. So when we took our first couple of rounds, we really changed our mindset, but it was ridiculous. We almost went too far, too quick.
Okay.
And we were like, we can change the world with this money, and it'll be incredible, and we'll have all this stuff. And we had to kind of scale back those ideas in our heads quite quickly. When we realized that, the 250 that we took in our first round or whatever was not going to change the world. Yeah. It's a difficult one to do. I think that there's a real balance there, because if you're not ambitious, obviously it's harder to meet your goals, or harder to strive and push. But at the same time, being overly ambitious just results in lots and lots of disappointment. So trying to balance the ambition with the actual reality is what I work on. I mostly do it annually. So at the start of every year, let's balance what we can actually do with the cash in bank versus our ambitions for the year ahead, and try and align those as much as possible. It's like I said, in the very early days, it was pretty crazy though. I remember some pretty stupid decks and some pretty stupid business plans that just never became reality, and they were also completely misguided, because, like I said, the cash was only going to take us so far, but also you'll often find that at that stage we were so early that we didn't know anything about the customer. We didn't know, for example, that we could acquire this many more of them, or that they would look like this. And then obviously you throw things in like COVID and lockdowns and multiple lockdowns and recessions, and then you realize that nothing is really that predictable anyway. So
absolutely.
It's a couple of years.
And I can imagine with the capital raised as well as expectation, it opens up possibility and potential, of course, but then you have to decide where to focus and how to focus those resources that you've now got available to you as well. As if you have less, it's almost like, well, we have to go where we are most effective right now because we can't do anything else. But then, with that investment, you suddenly get a lot of options you didn't have before, but you also have to make those work. So I guess it's hard to kind of feel your way through what isn't working to work out, what you are best exploring and going into.
Yeah, I like that as well. That's a really fun part of my job anyway, is the balancing of the resources and the focus that we can have.
Yeah.
So for example, there's 20 of us in Willo and 20 people running a global B2B SaaS company is pretty tight in terms of resource.
Yeah.
So we make that successful by just making sure that everyone is focused, but also just leveraging to the absolute extreme the output of every single person. So like, for example, trying to take away as much as possible from certain people's plates. So for example, automating or outsourcing stuff is really important now because, for example, there isn't a huge amount of point having a salesperson focusing on, finance, for example, when they're a good salesperson, because the finance part is just diluting their output.
Yeah.
And you can outsource financing, for example, or there isn't a huge amount of point having daily meetings with long agendas when the people already know what to do. And you can almost just, you can add up the hours that are lost if you're not careful in certain tasks, which could be removed or outsourced quite early on or automated quite early on. So I think that's been the most fun part about this business in particular for me, is trying to constantly improve and optimize the use of our resources because it's so limited.
Yeah.
The other, I guess, the challenge though there is that because we're all remote, it's harder to get close to that. So if you, for example, had 20 people in a room, you can quite quickly see, where is the time being wasted? What's the repetitive task that doesn't really need to be done on a weekly basis or a daily basis? It's much easier to see that when people are actually doing it. So it is more challenging when it's remote, I would say. But we are we're quite a fortunate team in the fact that we all communicate really openly, get along well, and we can actually share these things. So if I, for example, ask you, is there stuff about your job that you don't like, or is there things that you think are wasting time or money, you'll be able to tell me, which I find quite refreshing because it's not always been the case in other organizations that I've been in. People, for example, even people that are maybe concerned about saying a piece of their job could be automated, they could then feel like, I'm going to, maybe put my job at risk. So I'm not really telling them about that part that I could automate. And then the whole business suffers as a result. And then you just, wasting resource. I'm quite fortunate that everyone is on the same mindset here, that we should be trying to make the most of every hour of every day, because, there only is so many hours in the day.
I think that's so true.
I was going to say something as well, that we just successfully this year. So we have a remote team, as I mentioned. We work from Canada all the way across to the Philippines, and we have people all the way across those time zones. What's quite fun about that setup now, because we've managed to get to this point where we are really focused and highly optimized in terms of what we do, we can almost have a constant 24-hour working cycle, which is something that I'm really pleased to see is working this year.
No, I think that's really, really interesting. Something that I'm personally quite interested in, but also had a few different conversations with other founders as well as on the podcast as well, with people that have been able to successfully deploy that or something close to that kind of 24/7 kind of operational capability, and different team sites, slightly different overlap or whatever it might be, but with remote talent, with remote hiring, and all of these things being possible now. I think there's some really, really kind of smart companies actually saying, well, okay, well, if we were able to get the right people out across different time zones, what would that look like, and what would that enable us to do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's the first time I've really been able to do that as well, Matthew, in a proper scale. I've had contractors and things in different countries before, but to have the entire company spread out as widely as this is really quite fun. It's fun to see where it goes as well. For example, we're constantly trying new things. We're trying new time zones. We're trying new roles as well. And it's quite fun to see where we can push it. I love as well the fact that because everyone is in different countries, they have different cultures.
Yeah.
Everyone's contributing in different ways. I think that's a really interesting part that keeps our jobs interesting and exciting. For example, you come to a meeting in the morning, somebody can share like their view out their window, or they can share, how they celebrated their birthday yesterday, and it can be totally different depending on where they are in the world. And I find that stuff really quite fascinating, and it keeps work interesting and fun for everyone. And I think that's, key not only to the success of the business, but also the success of the product. Everyone's contributing in different ways. They've got their own different views on things. And we're quite fortunate that we can actually see that having a positive impact, which, I've never really had before. It's been quite cool to see.
Yeah, no, that sounds really, really cool. I think, I can see how that kind of diversity of perspective is, really good to have in any business. And I think it's great that we now have the technology, commonplace internet connections fast enough that is entirely possible. And I guess one thing I wonder as well is, with people across so many different time zones and different types of communication, then does that feed into the product itself in terms of highlighting communication challenges and opportunities?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So it absolutely does. If we were a UK-based business building UK-based software, it would not, for example, have the time zone support that it has.
Yeah,
because that's complicated. It also wouldn't have 13 languages, and these are like fully translated languages. So we have the 13 most commonly read languages in the world, including 2 types of Chinese and right to left Arabic as well. And these things just would not happen in a UK-based business because there would be no point. You wouldn't have the sort of the sight or the vision or the desire or the need to do that. Whereas, we have customers and we have colleagues speaking these languages in these time zones.
Yeah.
So you can have the platform working for them. And we do even, quite neat little things like, for example, we'll have the local time of the person inside Willo. So if you're a candidate and you apply, we'll tell you as a recruiter or a hiring manager what the local time is for Matthew.
I see.
So you don't end up placing a call to him at 3 a.m. or emailing him expecting a reply in the middle of the night. So there's just little I would say it's like a sprinkling of stuff. I can pinpoint many other examples, but just a sprinkling of stuff across the board.
Yeah.
I guess the terminology as well, the way that we use labels and describe things in tooltip text is definitely influenced by that as well. For example, something that makes sense to you or I in the UK does not often make sense to someone in another country.
Yeah.
Just because they have different experiences with technology, or they have different phrases for things. So that's been quite interesting as well. But I think it's definitely having a more diverse product results in hopefully a more diverse customer base, and a more diverse customer base is going to equal less risk. So I think it's quite an interesting one for us to have that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'd encourage any founder listening to this that has the opportunities to explore that kind of model to certainly, have a think about some of those benefits that it might be able to bring to their products and business as well.
Absolutely. I guess I would just add as well, Matthew, that we're working across different countries and working with colleagues in different places, but we're not really doing it from a cost perspective. So that's something that often people will ask me, oh, you must be doing this because you want to reduce costs. And it's not really true. We're actually doing it because the talent is there. The talent is better. For example, some of our software engineers are based in Manila in the Philippines. They're far, far better engineers than you might find in certain parts of Europe or in the UK. So we're doing it from a talent perspective first and foremost, which I think is something that's often not really appreciated.
No, absolutely. I think the first thing people jump to is cost when it comes to using talent globally. Let's be honest, a lot of people think, oh, we'll get some cheaper offshore talent that can hopefully be half decent, but there are a lot of hidden costs in that as well. But I think it's really, really positive to see someone saying they're doing it for quality reasons, and if you can build a business based on, a reasonable budget for good quality work, then that's got to open you up to then being able to say, well, no matter where they are, we want the best people to build the best product to give us the best result.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I think that's really, really refreshing to hear someone talk about, distributed talent, but also say it's not about cost, it's about the quality as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm aware we've been talking for a little while, and I think there's quite a few really, really good points that other founders can pick up and take away from this conversation, both in terms of what help people with in terms of hiring experience and hopefully some things to think about there, but also in terms of the Willo journey itself. I think there's a lot for people to take away from. But is there anything else you'd like to get across as advice to any startup or scale-up founder?
Good question. I guess the point around VC money would be my biggest thing. So I think we kind of touched on it earlier, but I think if I was giving any advice, it would be to think really, really hard about how you can fund your business and what you really need. And I think VC money is often thrown around as the answer that and it's also glamorized that a lot of businesses need to succeed. But I don't think it's often always the case that businesses need VC money. And I'm not saying that because we've had a negative experience. I'm just saying that it does change everything about the business. As we mentioned earlier, it changes your mindset, it changes your team's mindset, changes your focus. It gives you, more reporting routes. You've got, different expectations for different stakeholders all of a sudden that you never had to think about before. Your mindset can completely change. There's a whole bunch of stuff that comes with it, which not every business needs. I don't think there's a lot of businesses out there that could just do really successfully with some smart cash flow management, some smart loans, borrowing some friends and family money. There's a lot to be said for that. And also you can do a lot in SaaS in particular with very little.
Yeah.
So for example, our software costs, you would not believe how cheap our software tech stack is. And that's because we've just searched really hard for, discounts for startups, accelerator program discounts, whole bunch of stuff. I think if I was to put it into numbers, over the past 3 years, we've probably saved about £500,000 on software costs.
Yeah.
Just by going down the route of discounts and negotiating because we're a startup. And, I guess that's definitely something that would help you with your cash flow management if you have low costs in the first place. So be smart about where you're going to be spending your money and spend the money probably on people rather than tech, the right people in the right roles, rather than this ridiculous tech stack, which, a lot of I do see a lot of, unfortunately, founders diving in quite early on for no reason. You don't have to pay for even HubSpot in the first year, I don't think. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you can do that means your first year is literally going to be costless. So you can afford to do bootstrapping potentially, or afford to just have a few paying customers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really, really great advice. There's a lot of support available for startups, and we provide a lot of support like that for startups as well. But I think founders don't always know about it, and I think sometimes early tech teams, depending on how well you hire, can sometimes be a bit too enthusiastic about the vision of the future that they're engineering for as well. So I think try and rein in a bit of that tech stack by building for where you are now rather than where you think you might be in 5 years, because chances are it's going to be different anyway. So
absolutely. Yeah, that's it. I think that's a really good point. I would just add to that as well that we tend, and this is something that I've learned from previous businesses, it's just to not sign up for annual contracts. Just sign up for monthly, because you don't know what's going to happen next month. It's much easier. You might save 20% or 10%, but you don't know what's going to happen next month. Is that really going to be worth that? Saving that 10% if you really want to cancel next month? Probably not. I think trying to be nimble with the things that you do sign up for as well. To use that to that point, being over enthusiastic about what you need in a year's time doesn't really work out very well normally.
Yeah, great advice as has been echoed through this conversation. But thank you, so much for joining me today to talk to our audience on the podcast. And I wish you the best of luck with Willo, and I look forward to seeing how Willo evolves and that journey progresses as well.
Sure. Thanks. That was a fun conversation.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of Inside the Scale Up. Remember, for the show notes and in-depth resources from today's guest, you can find these on the website insidethescaleup.com. You can also leave feedback on today's episode, as well as suggest guests and companies you'd like to hear from. Thank you for listening.